Happy holidays, Lasercast fans. Anchorpete here, and I'm with my good friend and New York buddy over there, Dr. ZSGOD, Danny Torkel. It seems like everybody these days is talking about Spider-Man, and so that's why today we have chosen to talk about The Exorcist. So, The Exorcist is part 2 of our, actually 4-part Unholy Holidays celebration. We started out with Advent Calendar, which is currently on Shudder. Just came out in 2021. Danny and I both really enjoyed that. Then Danny rewatched Rosemary's Baby. I watched it for the first time. We both really dug that. And now we are talking about one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. And Danny, what I was thinking for this is, it's probably not that we're going to bring new information to the table for people that are fans of this movie. So why they're here is it's because of our views on the movie and like what we think about it. And so I'm going to ask you just right off the top, how many times have you seen The Exorcist in your life?
I would say probably more than 5, less than 10, from beginning to end. But sure. I mean, if you're talking about like specific scenes in like horror's greatest moments, compilation tapes and videos, I mean, the list goes up. But from beginning to end, I would say I've probably watched it maybe 7 or 8 times. I've watched it twice in the last year. I introduced my then probably 9 or 10-year-old daughter, Charlotte, to it, which is, you know, a sign of good parenting. And then I just rewatched it this morning. So that's 2 right there. And I showed you this before. I'm working off the director's cut, which was like a big deal when it came out back. I think it was like the late 90s, where William Friedkin decided to put like a bunch of the footage that he had cut, including the infamous spider walk, and which I know that a lot of our friends who they think is like the scariest thing ever. I know Lori from Ghost Girl Greetings. That's like the scene that just destroys her in this movie.
For me, it's a little different. I actually have seen The Exorcist multiple times as well, but I think I've only seen it like 3 or 4 times from the beginning to the end. And it's been a very long time since I've watched it from the beginning to the end. Like you said, it's always in these like best of clips or the scariest moments, kind of compilations. So you see the same scenes over and over again, particularly the end of the film. But I liked watching it as a almost 40-year-old man and just kind of picking up things that I just never picked up as. Like, you know, you mentioned when it was re-released in the theaters with the special footage. It's kind of like when Star Wars came out with the special edition. You know, all these people that had never seen it on the big screen got that chance to see it, and I was one of them. That was the first time that I ever saw The Exorcist. And I have to admit, one thing that's changed as being a dad and also being on this channel with you is that, like, I've kind of manned up a lot. I used to be much more of a wuss when it came to horror movies. And so when I would watch this movie, I was so focused on how scared I was going to be and so worried about, like, oh, this scene is coming up or it's going to get worse, that I'd be so focused on that, I wouldn't take it details and really give it a critical review. So that's what I liked about this time around is I was able to like notice the scenes, notice the direction, cinematography, you know, the pacing, and that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about today.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up like being a 40-year-old, almost 40-year-old man and being a dad, because when I watched this with Charlotte last year, it totally hit differently than any other time I'd ever watched it.
Right.
It was the first time I think I'd watched a movie straight through, maybe as a father. Like, I don't think I had watched it. You know, like The Exorcist isn't a movie. It's not like a Halloween or a Black Christmas that like you throw on that one time a year and you probably watch it 4 or 5, or like for me, Jaws, where I probably watch it 10 times a year just because it's my favorite movie. The Exorcist is one of those movies that like you kind of have to be in the mood for, and that mood doesn't come very often. So last year when I watched it with Charlotte, getting to see it from the point of view as a parent and identifying for the first time so much more with the psychosis of Ellen Burstyn's character, Chris McNeil, the mom, and like how would I be reacting? And I was looking up on IMDb, and what I noticed was so many of the scenes that people couldn't handle back in like the 70s when it came out were actually the scenes before any of the crazy possession stuff. It was the medical stuff that Linda Blair's character was going through. That one scene where she has that terrible procedure where they stick like the needle in her neck and then the blood shoots out.
Mm-hmm.
That scene always gave me the willies, but then sitting there with like Charlotte next to me last year was like totally different. Yeah, and like watching it even today, those scenes always worked more for me than the shocking possession stuff that we get in like the second half of the movie.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Really well put. Yeah. That stuff is really disturbing. And I think what makes it even more disturbing is the actual way the movie's shot, right? I haven't seen many William Friedkin movies, but The Exorcist seems like it's of a time. And there's that 70s style where it kind of feels like you're almost like watching a documentary, or it's like very like in the moment, very realistic. There's actually a shot when she's having one of those medical procedures done where like there's an item that's like within the camera's lens and it's like out of focus. So you get like a little bit of a blur. And that's the kind of thing you see in documentaries and you see in like this sort of like handheld footage where it's not a perfect shot. It has that feeling of there's a person with a camera recording what's going on. And I think that just adds to the realism. And throughout this whole movie, there's not a lot of music. You know, people always think of that iconic tubular. Go ahead. You say it because I'm going to fuck it up.
Tubular bells, yeah.
Tubular bells, yeah. There's that theme, and they only played a couple of times throughout the whole movie. But otherwise, the movie's pretty devoid of music. And so it just feels very realistic. It feels like you're a voyeur watching this. And one thing I noticed this time around, too, is that there's so much of just noticing what's around you, noticing the people especially. That's such a big part of the movie is like there's the people that are in Iraq in the beginning of the movie that Father Marin sees. And there's people in a asylum when Father Karras's mother is in the asylum. It's just these little shots and they're just little glimpses, but it just adds to that overall feeling of just like paranoia and you're just kind of creeped out,
and,
right? Tension.
And to pick up exactly where you left off, that all of that makes it very disorienting. The movie, it's not a criticism. It's just the movie does these like bizarre time jumps where if you're not paying attention, you don't really know if what you just watched was maybe real. You don't know if it was a dream sequence. Like you just mentioned the scene with Father Karras. He goes into this institution where because he has his, because he's a priest and he has I don't know what it's called. I'm Jewish. Yes, he has that on. All of these people in the institution start swarming him. Father, help me, help me, help me. And he's like fighting through them to get to his mother. And then in the very next scene, we're told, oh yeah, his mother died at home and was dead for 2 days before anybody found her. And I'm like, wait, what? Like,
yes.
And it like there's part of me, there's like the nerd in me who's like, haha, that's a continuity error. But then there's like I'm pretty sure this was done intentionally to make me feel messed up as I'm watching it. And there's a lot of there's a lot of things like that where the mom, Ellen Burstyn, walks into the room, the windows are wide open. She's like, what the hell? Why were Reagan's windows open? How could you do that? And then it's like, oh, by the way, the director of the movie she's making is dead. And we find out, we almost have to piece it together ourselves that, oh, he was, and like, it literally took me, I think, until this time to realize the reason that Reagan does the first head swivel.
Yes.
Was to mock the fact that she did murder because they make such a big deal about how his head was turned. And I never put that together until this viewing. And I was like, do you know what she did? Ah, okay. Now I get it. Okay. The most disturbing thing in this movie by a mile is the fact that Max von Sydow was only 5 years older than us when he made this movie.
Ooh, yeah, that's pretty rough. I didn't know that.
and the reason he looks like he's 75 is because of the makeup effects done by Dick Smith, who's like one of the most legendary makeup effects artists. I will argue that Max von Sydow's makeup in this movie is better than Reagan's makeup, just because if you asked 100 people who never saw The Exorcist to look at Max von Sydow, nobody on earth would say, oh, that's a 44-year-old man with makeup on. They'd say, oh, they got a 75-year-old man to play the Exorcist. And that's the most amazing part of the movie.
And I mean, of course, there's also Max von Sydow's performance that's so good. And one thing in general about this movie is just the quality of the performances of all the actors. It's one of those like lightning in a bottle things, because I look through the list of characters, every single person in this movie that's one of the main characters, their actor does an incredible job.
Ellen Burstyn, Jason Miller, Linda Blair all got nominated for Oscars. Best actress and then supporting actor and actress. So that's like the three main characters right off the bat. Yeah.
But Linda Blair did not win, right?
No, none of them won. The movie did win 2 Oscars. I think it was like William Peter Blatty won for best adapted screenplay, adapting his own novel, and it won best sound, which makes perfect sense.
Oh yes, the sound in this movie is ridiculous.
So I read this on IMDb, and it actually it annoyed me. So the demon voice that Reagan has is done by an actress who actually won an Oscar in like 1940, I think it's 49, for All the King's Men, named Mercedes McCambridge. And there was like a controversy over whether she had asked to not be credited and then retroactively said, I want to be credited. And when the Academy found out that like Linda Blair wasn't doing her own voice, they were like, oh, well, then she's profiting off other people's work. And I'm like, is she? Because she was physically in that movie with all that makeup on, giving that performance, and you're going to like shit on her performance because they dubbed a demon voice over a 12-year-old? Like that. Oh my God. That to me is like saying that like, well, you know, Bruce Willis is really lame because they had stuntmen in Die Hard. Like,
because, you know, it's funny because there's a couple of comparisons I can make to that too, right? Like, let's just talk about Max von Sydow, for example, right? He's the voice of Vigo, the Carpathian, right, in Ghostbusters 2. And I remember as a kid, it was like one of those situations where like I thought that was Max von Sydow, that was him, but the actor.
I had no idea about that. Holy crap!
Right. So there's many movies where like the actor's original voice performance is not that good, and then they dub over like a great actor's voice performance. And it's just,
Darth Vader is the best example.
That's my point I'm trying to make, is that the physicality of a role should not be discredited. The physicality, Linda Blair sitting there making those faces, she's moving her body in such a way, it doesn't matter that it's not her vocals that are coming out. She still has to like say the lines and move her mouth that way. I mean, I look at this and I'm like, she did not win an Academy Award. It's ridiculous. Like, how old was she? Do you know how old she was?
12. She was 12.
12 fucking years old. I mean, it's incredible what she does in this movie. So much of the performances are based on William Friedkin's directing, and that he was a real terror on the set. Like, one of the things I've seen multiple times with this movie is the behind the scenes documentary. Not that one that's on Shudder, that cursed one, but like there's another documentary about The Exorcist that's just like the behind the scenes, and it's so good. Like, that in itself is just super entertaining to watch, you know? And like William Friedkin was like a fucking madman. Like, you know all those stories, right? Like the stuff he did behind the scenes.
I read that him and Jason Miller had countless like shouting matches and everything. And he, I mean, the physical toll that Linda Blair went through, like she got physically injured severely during the scene where she's like snapping back and forth in bed. like she like got really hurt. Like that movie, I mean, it goes without saying, couldn't be made today because like there'd be a lot more stringent like child labor laws. Like
Yeah.
I guess like 60s and 70s, you can get away with pretty much anything. So
Yeah. Ellen Burstyn, there's that part where she gets like kind of smacked across the face by Reagan and she falls on the ground, right? They did that scene multiple times and she had to have a harness on and they would like yank her back. The prop guy would like yank her back. Have you heard this story?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of the scenes where it looks like the actors are like shocked is because they were genuinely shocked.
Right.
Like Jason Miller, they told him the pea soup vomit is going to hit you in the chest, and then it hit him in the face and in his mouth, and so that's like a genuine like, oh God, what is going on reaction.
Right.
And there was a lot of stuff like that with the scene with her being slapped by Linda Blair and getting pulled off the bed. Yeah,
right. Just for our viewers, in case they haven't seen the documentary, like the prop guy, he would pull her back and she's like, oh, this is starting to hurt my back getting pulled in this harness. So she goes up to William Friedkin and she says, can we just ease up on that? This is really bothering me. And William Friedkin's like, yeah, we'll ease up, Then William Friedkin goes over to the prop guy and he says, really yank on her this time. And so they just like pulled her back and slammed her into the floor. And so when she's like screaming in pain, that's because they did that to her. Yeah. Like he fired shotguns on set sometimes just to rattle them. It's just insanity, but like it makes this movie like that. The reason why this movie is so fucking realistic and everyone just seems miserable is because it was a miserable experience making it.
I gotta be honest, like I don't think this is a perfect movie. I don't love The Exorcist as much as everybody else does in the horror genre community.
Yeah.
There's parts of this movie that feel really weird. I love Lee J. Cobb, but there's no reason there needs to be two separate conversations with two separate priests about, hey, I got extra tickets to the movies. You want to come? Like, it's so out of nowhere. And, like, be a cop investigating the murder. That makes sense. All these other things that he's there for, they don't really make sense. And then, like, Reagan, at the end of the movie, Reagan is laying on the floor crying. There's a dead guy on the floor. One priest is dead on the floor. The other priest just leapt out the freaking window and is dying on the street. And they just get in their car and drive away. And he just shows up like 5 minutes late. And he's like, oh, well, I missed them. I guess those two deaths will just go unanswered. And hey, priest, you want to go to the movies? I got extra tickets. It's so weird.
So that's in the extended cut, though, right? Is they drive away and then he comes up? That happens in the extended cut?
Yes. Well, is that not how the original ends? Because it's been so long since I've seen the original version of the movie. That's probably the problem. Is
I just watched the original version on Amazon. I just got it for like $2.99. And the way it ends is Father Dyer. He comes and he says goodbye to Reagan and her mom. They drive away. The mom gives him the necklace that Father Karras had. And then he goes and he looks down the steps, and then he walks back from the steps, and it cuts to the title card. So that's it.
Okay. So that whole final 2 minutes of Kinderman showing up and then walking away arm in arm with Father Dyer doesn't happen in the original film. Then I probably would have, in that case, would have liked the original ending, because it just feels so tacked on. At the end, like looking at the steps and then deciding, nah, I'm gonna walk the other way, cut to black. It feels like a more like direct ending to this movie than to kind of end it on this like, hey, so those characters are now gone. What are you doing later? It just seems so weird. Jason Miller was my favorite character in this movie, Father Karras. He's always been. I love the issues that he's going through, being like a priest that is so obviously has lost the faith. but is struggling to get his faith back as the movie goes. There's the whole situation with his mother, which amazingly, this movie was made in 1973. We see that the healthcare system has not really improved that much because it's like his uncle is like, yeah, what do you want to do? Take it to a private hospital? We can't afford that. And, and then he like outright blames him. He's like, well, if you would have become a big time psychologist instead of going into the priesthood, you might have been able to afford this. And I'm like, guy's trying to serve God here. What are you doing?
I know. Yeah. I like that the priests themselves, because even Father Dyer has that time when he's playing the piano at the party and he talks about his vision of heaven and he says it's like a nightclub, and you can kind of tell that he would much rather be like, a musician or something like that. And then obviously Father Karras, he is into psychology and he could have been a psychologist at some point. And they almost take on religion as like a burden that they have to take on. It's their cross to bear, pun intended. But and there's that modern kind of thing of faith, right? Because there's that one scene where Father Karras is walking through the subway, and then the guy turns and he says, "I used to be an altar boy, Father. Can you spare some money for an altar boy?" And it's that feeling of like God is dead. And I know that is something they literally say in Rosemary's Baby, but I almost feel like it's better portrayed in The Exorcist. The world of The Exorcist feels more like God is dead versus the Rosemary's Baby world.
In both movies, you're dealing with the actual like devil, and what I like about this one is you have it's very strange. Like I would really love to know if Blatty and Friedkin, because I've never read the Exorcist novel, but it's very interesting that Rosemary's Baby is about an actor who basically sells his soul to this satanic cult to, so that they can have his wife give birth to the son of Satan. And this movie is about an actress whose daughter is beset by Satan. And the fact that it's both movies involve these like, this movie more than The Exorcist, more than Rosemary's Baby, because you get the idea that Chris McNeil is very famous, whereas Guy in Rosemary's Baby was kind of like up and coming. But it's still like this idea that, success has consequences. In the Omen, the main characters, Gregory Peck's character is an ambassador, very like high ranking in politics. And so all three films in like the Unholy Trinity have this connection of like success breeds evil in some way. So, I don't know. The fact that they, in both movies, this and Rosemary's Baby, they do have like, you mentioned it. They yell, "God is dead, Satan lives" at the end of her. They literally yell that out loud. In this movie, like, she's in the bed and there's so much, talk about what she's doing to God and, what she thinks about God and what these priests can do with their faith. So I don't know, as somebody who's not very religious, it does they still manage to both creep me out in different ways.
Just to go along with your point, not only are the people successful, or I guess in the Omen he's successful, she's successful in this, but obviously actors, because they're actors in both of these two movies that we reviewed, they're always kind of looked at as liberal, right? Like progressive and moving forward. And people that are religious are always kind of looked at as, conservative, right? For the most part. I mean, obviously there's different versions everywhere. But I think that the 70s and the 60s themselves are these times of great upheaval, great social change, and, a much more liberal way of thinking and progressive way of thinking versus conservative way of thinking. And I think that both these movies really reflect that. And it's interesting because the book itself and the movie are called The Exorcist. So it's not like Reagan is possessed or the possessed girl or Satan's possession. There's no shit like that. It's about the person that's literally protecting us from the devil. And I think that that's the difference between this movie and Rosemary's Baby, is that there literally is a person that still has faith. It's not just victims. Rosemary's the victim. Reagan is the victim. Reagan's mom is the victim. But The Exorcist has the defender. You know, the person that's still kind of conservative, the religious person that's there to protect them.
Just Rosemary's Baby, I hadn't seen in a long time, and I feel like my opinion on Rosemary's Baby really changed a lot watching it now. I really loved the movie when I watched it last week, and I really appreciated it a lot more than I did when I was younger. The Exorcist, I have always, like, my opinion on The Exorcist has never changed. I respect the hell out of it. I totally understand why it is number one on most people's lists of greatest horror movie ever made. I think that I just don't love it. I don't love it. I think there's parts of the movie that are disorienting, and I think a lot of that time jump stuff does impact the plot. I think there's some extraneous stuff that can be skipped over, especially in the director's cut, which is longer, of course. And I think a lot of the scares in the movie, especially that worked on people in the 70s, I think I always took them more as a shock value than truly scary. Like seeing a 12-year-old girl do the things that she does, it doesn't scare me. It's like, ugh, like, oh, great. Whereas, not to spoil it, but like The Omen legitimately terrified me from the time I saw it as a kid. And every time I see it, it gives me goosebumps all over. This movie scares me as a father, thinking, you know, Charlotte just turned 11, so she's almost Reagan's age. It scares me in that idea of like, how would I handle this if this was my kid? You know, there's one scene that infuriates me when she tells the doctor, I was on the bed and the bed was bouncing up and down. And the doctor's like, this isn't about the bed. And I'm like, beds don't do that. Like, what are you talking about? This isn't about the bed. He's like, it's not about the bed. It's about Reagan's brain. I'm like, no, it's not. like, what are you talking about? And like, I do love and respect The Exorcist for what it is, but it's not my personal favorite horror film. I kind of judge this in the same way I think about Blade Runner, in the sense that I love and respect what it did for the science fiction genre, but give me Terminator over Blade Runner every time. You know, it just in like that, like it's never going to be the sci-fi movie I pick to watch, but I respect it for what it did. And that's kind of how I view The Exorcist as a horror film.
So much of what I appreciate about this movie is in the making of this movie and what they did and like how well made it is. So I think that's why I like it so much. But I'm glad that you took the time out of your schedule to watch it again and to review it with me. And I'm actually really looking forward to watching The Omen with you because of so much of what you've said about it. And so we will celebrate the birth of Damien before the new year of 2022. So, yeah, man. So until then, if you guys have not liked and subscribed, please do. We definitely loved having you guys chime in with what you think about all these classic movies and new horror movies as well. And me and Danny will be here next week for The Omen.